key pieces of infrastructure, which threatens everybody downstream from them. And they're threatening to blow the dams because they consider, in their point of view, that the dams are un-Islamic, because the dams did not exist when Muhammad had his revelation.
So their heads are still back in the 6th, 7th century.
Yeah.
Like many other people, like many people in America whose heads are back in those times. But we're not going to go there, Republicans, because we were talking before the show a little bit about 3 Republicans in the South who have taken a very positive and very strong stance against the Confederate flag flying as part of a modern day representation of what in fact should have ended 150 years ago, the notion that the South shall rise again. But Nikki Haley, governor of South Carolina, Philip Gunn, who is Speaker of the House in Mississippi, and a fellow by the name of Paul Thurmond, son of Mr. Racist himself, Strom Thurmond, have all come out strongly and forcibly in favor of taking the Confederate flag not just off of the lawns of the state houses, but some of these states, like Mississippi, has the Confederate flag actually built into their state flag. It's a portion of it. And they've come out very strongly, and they've got nothing to gain by this. I mean, all they've got to gain is really, in fact, what they've got to lose. They've got a lot of their base is really, really angry at them for doing this. So kudos to them for doing that, for taking a stand for what's clearly right. And so go ahead with the water.
Yes, there's a lot that I want to talk about that as well. But just very briefly back to ISIS. So to me, it's very clear to me that the Islamic State is a fait accompli. It's not a project. It's a project in the works, but it's already there. And we have to deal with the reality on the ground, and there's not going to be a unitary government. There's a lot of the things that the pundits are saying about Iraq are false. Now, the only people who have had any success against the Islamic State are the Kurds. The Kurds have been successful in recapturing towns that the Islamic State has, Kurdish towns that they've captured. So I really think that we need to, and it's talking about the 21st century, it's time to recognize Kurdistan as an independent state and support them.
Now, you were there. You helped train the Iraqis to defend their own country. And we know that Iraq was hobnailed together by the British back in the 1910s from 3 separate countries into one country that they referred to as Iraq. Why is it that the Kurds have been so successful in defending their own portion of Iraq, and it seems like the rest of the Iraqis have had a very difficult time, if any success at all, in defending their own country against the Islamic State?
It's a brilliant question, and it's something that we asked ourselves, in 2004 when we would engage with, actually the guys that we were fighting originally were Zacchea, and he called himself the Islamic State of Iraq before he pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and then it became Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So we've been basically fighting the same guys, and they've been through a series of iterations and incarnations, but that's who they are. The Iraqi soldiers that I was with, their initial inclination was to throw their rifles down and run away whenever they got attacked. We would not let them, because we had superior training, we had more people, we had more firepower, and it was just a matter of will, it was a matter of training that we would not let them, give a numerically inferior force with inferior firepower the battlefield.
It almost sounds like, a little bit like, during the Civil War, when the Civil War began, and we sent Union troops went down into Virginia to Bull Run to teach those Rebs a lesson, and got sent packing, got chased back in the direction of Washington. Is it because the Southerners were fighting for their own? They were fighting for their lives, basically. They were fighting for what was theirs. They stood to lose an awful lot, whereas the soldiers for the North, for the Union side, maybe they didn't have maybe they didn't have the motivation to fight. Maybe that's what's going on in Iraq.
So yeah, they don't have the motivation to fight. The leadership is it's not even leadership. What is called leadership is terribly, terribly corrupt. There's no motivation to fight for corrupt leadership. And it's a cash and carry society. So if somebody gets killed, they have no faith that the government is going to take care of their family. And the way the culture is, if you lose a male in that culture, then the rest of the family, has no source of income.
Yeah, it's a very patriarchal society, rather than, I guess, most of the societies in the world are matriarchal.
Right, and people starve. I mean, people go without, and it's so their inclination is, I have to protect my family, or I'm not going to engage in this. So that's the dynamic. But why isn't that the dynamic for ISIS? Well, they have become so radicalized, and I really believe a lot of it is psychological. That there's a unraveling of the personal ego of these ISIS fighters.
Okay.
That they don't care, and they're promised all kinds of promises that if they get killed. It's a very, very psychological operation.
So they're taught that they're fighting for something, that they've bought into the notion of fighting for something that is bigger than themselves, which always is a great motivator to anybody that engages in any kind of fighting. Is that it can't be about yourself. It's got to be about your family. It's got to be about things that are your God. If you use God as a fallback position for what you believe in,
and they also do something that's very, very effective. So, whereas they will have mass executions of their enemies that they capture, with a bullet to the head, which is it sucks, but it's painless.
Yeah.
Or a beheading for within their own ranks for fighters that are insufficiently zealous, that are cowards. They will crucify them and crucify them publicly.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big motive. And
as they did in the Bible, where they're up on some sort of physical structure.
Yeah, a cross. Yeah.
A cross, and they're left to die. Does that have any Christian significance is that strictly Christian, or is that non-sectarian?
Non-sectarian.
Okay.
And you can Google this, and I don't recommend anybody do it because it'll ruin your day, but you can Google this and see what it looks like, and it's really horrible. They don't nail people to the cross, but they tie them to the cross and they let them die very, very slowly, and it's a terrible, terrible way to die. That's a pretty big motivator too. On the one hand, you're motivated because if you get killed, you can go to paradise and get 72 virgins, or you can be crucified.
Yeah.
So it's not a tough.
So it's not necessarily that you have to believe that the good thing is going to happen, but you do have to believe that the bad thing will happen if you don't succeed.
Right. Absolutely. I really and truly believe that. But here's what ISIS really wants, and a couple of things have happened very, very recently. The first suicide bombing on Saudi soil happened.
Yeah.
ISIS wants to overthrow the Saudi monarchy. The Saudi monarchy comes from the House of Saud, and their official title is Defenders of the Faith. But ISIS believes that they are non-Islamic. The House of Saud only comes into the historic record in the 16th century.
Okay, so it's long after Muhammad.
Yes, 1,000 years after Muhammad. So they think, in their mindset that, Saud is basically Arabist. The House of Saud, they're a powerful house, and they took Riyadh back from the Ottomans in the early 20th century, and that's who the British dealt with during World War I, and that's how they, basically retook or captured, defeated the Ottomans and created the Saudi monarchy, and that's how Iraq got built, because they took a nephew of the guy that they made king, Ibn Saud, and Prince Faisal, and they sent him up to Iraq, to Baghdad, to become the king or the prince of what was then Iraq, the three provinces.
I've read about King Faisal,
so that's how that happened. But they want to. ISIS believes that the leadership of the faithful, the Dar al-Islam, which is the House of Peace, should be by a member of Muhammad's tribe, which is the Quraysh tribe, and that is where al-Baghdadi comes from. He is Qurayshi. Basically, that's what they want to do. Is they want to overthrow.
It almost sounds like Qurayshi. It almost has that little bit of a tonality of the head of a group in Waco, Texas.
Quraysh.
David Koresh.
It's an anglicization of Quraysh.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yes, and a lot of people. I compliment you on picking that up. Most people don't pick that up.
Well, I'm always listening to words and trying to it's the only way you really think you can really bridge languages is listen to words in different languages and kind of match them up. And
so this is what the Muslim claim is, that Jesus came from the Quraysh tribe.
Okay.
And David Koresh claimed he was from the Quraysh tribe and was son of God and Muhammad. And that was, he was a cult, obviously. But that's what his whole thing was. But so first, for ISIS, get rid of the Saudi monarchy. Second, get rid of the Shia, who believe that the leadership of the Islamic world should be religious authorities, not from the family of or from the tribe of Muhammad.
Okay.
And then they'll turn their attention to the West.
So they have to basically clean up their own house,
yes,
get control of their own territory, and then branch outward from there.
Yes. And they want to. And this, over the weekend, so a lot of things happened over the weekend. There was what they call Bloody Friday, the coordinated mass murders in multiple countries on Friday. But then also over the weekend, multiple bombings in Baghdad. ISIS has been perpetrating multiple suicide bombings in Baghdad. Ultimately, what they want to do is they want to take Baghdad and establish the seat of the caliphate in Baghdad, which is what the third caliphate did. They went from Raqqa, which is where Daesh, they call themselves Daesh, we call them ISIS. Yep. Daesh is now, and moved to Baghdad, which is how that's specifically why Baghdad was founded in 962 AD, was to be the seat of the caliphate.
That is so sad what's happened to Baghdad, a great center of culture.
It should have been. It was one of the great cities in the world, one of the great learning centers in the world. It was a crossroads of the East and the Middle East and the Far East, and a great center of commerce.
And right on two major rivers.
It was multi-ethnic, multi-religious. It was, had a great library. The University of Baghdad is one of the oldest universities in the world. It's 1,000 years old. Is older than any. I think it's older than any university in Europe. But unfortunately, the whole thing has been basically destroyed. So anyway, but that's what's going on, and. On the one hand, I'm not at all optimistic about the Iraqi army. There were supposed to be 14 divisions of Iraqi soldiers.
How many in a division?
For the Iraqi army, so Marine divisions are heavier. They're about 22,000. U.S. Army divisions are small. They're about 15,000. Iraqi divisions are about 15,000.
Is that something that those numbers that have evolved out of ancient warfare?
Yes.
To as a number that was presumed to be the ultimate or the perfect amount of fighters to accomplish certain things?
Yeah, it actually comes originally from the Romans. A legion was 6,000.
Okay.
And then a legion was basically equivalent to like a regiment now.
Okay.
And then they have multiple. Napoleon basically invented divisions.
Okay.
And that was his great organization.
Different specified tasks within.
Yes.
Within a group, so you had people that were. I guess in this time you had people that manned the cannons, people that were on horseback,
right?
People that just did different infantry members.
There were some of that, but Napoleon was. But it wasn't codified. Napoleon is who really codified division structures in the military, and then everybody adopted it after him. So our U.S. Army comes from Napoleon. But anyway, so there are only 5 Iraqi divisions now that we can account for.
That you anticipated somebody 14?
Yes, at least 9 have disintegrated, and none of the Iraqi divisions are deployable outside of Baghdad. They're incapable of projecting power any further than the city limits of Baghdad.
That makes them a fixed target for everybody.
Right, and they're in a I'll give you an example. Right now, there's fighting in Fallujah to take back Fallujah from the Islamic State. It is not by Iraqi army; it's by Iraqi Shia militia, supported by Iranian special forces. The Iraqi army is capable of doing nothing right now.
Is Iran the power broker in the Middle East now?
It is, and this is really a proxy war between. Well, it's going to be a 3-way war between ISIS, Saudi Arabia, and Iran.
It seemed like prior to the Second Gulf War that that Saddam Hussein was really the only counterbalance there was in the region to Iran.
There are a number of people who now think that he was the linchpin that was holding the whole thing together.
He did it through the means of dictatorship, but
right, and
but like Mussolini, the trains ran on time. The culture was held together, and people managed their day-to-day things were taken care of, and were able to move along at a reasonable pace, but
well, I mean,
at a cost.
At a cost, and there's a lot of things wrong with Iraq, but now there's a lot more wrong with Iraq than there was. So out of the frying pan and into the fire. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have an Islamic State, or would you rather have a fairly secular but brutal dictatorship? Unfortunately, we're going to have to answer that question over time, and it appears, and I really think that history is starting to render its judgment. I'll give you an example. Donald Rumsfeld just came out with an interview in I think Great Britain, where he said that he was against the Iraq War. So that's how you know that this thing's a loser. Everybody's trying to rehabilitate their reputation. He said that.
He was against it all along. He was against it before he was for it.
He said that he had very serious reservations we have the memo where he said, "Roll it up all in one, related or not." But now he's trying to rehabilitate his reputation for history, and he is just. Fabulously mendacious.
That just strikes me as in a very bizarre and a very sad kind of way, but it's got a touch of humor to it.
Ironic, bitterly ironic.
Bitterly, yeah.
I have long been very, very going back to
who's next, Wolfowitz? The lobby saying, no, never mind what the cameras showed. I was against it in private.
Well, this is what I'm very afraid of, is especially if Jeb Bush runs for president. If you look at who his foreign advisors are, they're all the same people from the Bush administration, and they're all the same people who were the authors of the policy about this, misguided adventure into Iraq, and
neoconservatives and the neoliberals. Let's not forget the neoliberals, because they're in there too. The same mindset, the notion of nation building, and the United States somehow being the police force of the world.
Yeah, John Bolton is an advisor to Jeb Bush, and Paul Wolfowitz, all the same characters. And Jeb Bush was unable to say that Iraq was a mistake. And he still has never said the name George Bush. He said my brother. He said he'll say my brother, but he will not say the name George Bush. And George Bush never goes to any Republican events ever.
He's busy painting.
This is one of the great geopolitical blunders of certainly in our history, but maybe of all time. And the final chapter has not yet been written. I really believe that in the not too distant future, we will see. ISIS wants to capture American troops. and they've attacked a number of bases where American advisors are based. And we will see a couple of scenarios. One, Americans doing a fighting retreat back to the Green Zone in Iraq, or two, Americans being captured by ISIS, or three, and it would be bigger than the fall of Saigon, the fall of Baghdad, with the evacuation of the Green Zone embassy, which is now the largest embassy in the world.
The Emerald City.
Yeah, the evacuation of that. It would be, for the 21st century, a geopolitical cataclysm.
Well, on February 15th, 2003, no, 2004, that's, wait a second, 2001. Was April of what year that we invaded Iraq?
2003.
Okay. February 15th, 2003, I was in Times Square with a lot of friends, and we seemed pretty convinced that it was the wrong thing to do, not just in a Vietnamese kind of sense, but in a much larger sense than the mistakes of Vietnam. And we were pretty convinced, and I'm proud to say that we were extremely against the invasion of Iraq before we were incredibly against the invasion of Iraq. And but you hate to think that history proves you right on something when unfortunately you didn't have the power to sway hearts and minds to do the right thing or not do the wrong thing. It is very sad.
Yeah, I was in the fall of 2002. Maybe late November, early December. I was at a professional conference. A bunch of military officers there, and there's a guy who used to talk about things that he thought had a 50% chance of happening, and one of them was the Iraq invasion. He asked the room, there was like 150 officers there, how many supported an invasion of Iraq, or how many were opposed to it, and I was one of maybe 6 out of 150 that opposed. I didn't think it was good for our country for professional reasons, not
political reasons.
Right.
Yeah. You knew more than any of the rest of us knew about the potential ramifications of invading a sovereign nation and taking out the linchpin against Iran.
That, and I had very serious reservation about a preemptive war. I don't think that was good for our country under any circumstances. But
I think we've had a president in place that has not fallen prey to fears that are bandied about Iran.
Amazing the inner strength of will that it must have taken to stand up to calls for, especially in Syria. Just a tremendous pressure on him to. And that would have been the easy thing to do. It would have been very, very easy to. So really incredible.
There was John McCain, military man, in Syria, slapping folks on the back and shaking hands with people that ultimately, as it turns out, were members of the Islamic State.
Yeah, and amazing. You have to, whenever you talk about John McCain, you have to, preempt it with talking about his heroic service as a POW. But there's that. Very recently, John McCain entered into the National Defense Authorization Act, an amendment that would have defunded all of the VA's congressionally mandated research into toxic injuries and Gulf War illness. And so you really have to wonder, and he does this consistently. He is always trying to defund stuff like that for veterans. So I really, a lot of people don't pay attention to that level of detail on this stuff, but I do. And so I really have to wonder about him. He opposes everything for veterans. He opposes the Web GI Bill. Amazingly. I mean, there are...
Explain what that is.
So the Web GI Bill is the basically the 21st century version of the GI Bill that everybody's familiar with after World
From the
War II.
1940s,
Right.
yeah, that they set in place very early on in World War II,
Yes.
as you've told us, yeah.
That allows Iraq and Afghanistan veterans to go to college basically for no cost or subsidized cost, and they draw a stipend while they're in college, and basically it is a launching pad for them to enter into the civilian workforce and enter into the military, the middle class really. It's middle class economics essentially, and a lot of sociologists and economists credit the original GI Bill with creating the middle class in our country, and creating suburbia. But John McCain opposed it, and unbelievably, I mean, it's called the Webb GI Bill. Jim Webb was the sponsor. And
As opposed to the internet, okay.
Right, correct.
And Jim Webb, as we talked about briefly on before we came on the air, we talked about Jim Webb as being one of the candidates that that has a lot of good things going for them.
Right.
He's conservative, but he's conservative in all the right ways.
Right. He comes from the mountains of Virginia. He comes from Scot-Irish background. He was a Reagan Democrat, basically, and he can talk to basically economically disenfranchised white blue-collar workers and that kind of people. And he's a middle-class guy made good. He's a war hero. He got a Navy Cross in Vietnam. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's a real amazing guy.
Take a look at him while you're looking at Bernie Sanders and also, I guess, Hillary Clinton also. But, thanks for joining us. It's been Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, Michael Zacchea, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Zacchea, retired United States Marine Corps. And do a little research, see what you come up with, give us a call, come and join us. Enjoy your afternoon.